Now before we get started with this video, there's something that I wanted to say. I originally recorded this over a week and a half ago, but I had to put it off because I was traveling. In the time since then, I've thought about this even further, and I realized that while this is mostly kind of a story time and also just an argumentative video about drugs, there are things that I don't feel I covered as much as I really want to. So I'm doing them here before we get started so you can keep this fresh in your mind. One of the main reasons why I'm so impassioned about drugs is because I have had many people in my life that I lost because of them. Yet at the same time, I had many experiences with taking drugs that I think it's important to analyze exactly how we perceive them and how we perceive people who do them in society. Every day, more than 90 Americans die from overdosing on opioids. And as some people can try and brush aside the drug problem and kind of plug their ears, I don't think that's appropriate. Just as much, I don't think that's very appropriate that we also stigmatize and tend to try and almost villainize people who are chemically dependent on opioids. These are people that, regardless of how you may think about them personally, they're still people, they're still Americans, they're still human. And regardless of how we got to this point, with opioids, with illegal drugs and prescription drugs, keep in mind that empathy goes a long way, and that everybody should at least be deserving of the same baseline respect, regardless of the trials that they're going through. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the video.
What's going on, everybody? Jeff Holiday here, and I thought I'd do something a little bit different today. There's a lot of different videos I was thinking about making, but as my conversations evolved throughout this morning, I realized I just kind of wanted to have something a little bit more, I don't know, chill, a little bit more low-key. Now, don't get me wrong, the topic we're going to talk about is very serious. It's a very serious topic, but I kind of want to do it in a more relaxed setting. So I'm here in my studio, which is my garage, where I usually am recording my live shows, like the YouTube Saints or Thirsty Thursday, any of those types of things. And I mostly hang out in here because previously, when I was smoking cigarettes, I could smoke cigarettes in my garage, and I just have a fan blowing the smoke out, keeps out of the house, away from my family. And now I vape, and I don't really want to vape in the house either. That's just, no. Nobody needs to be subjected to my, I like to call them my space drugs, because it's nicotine, and it is a drug, but it looks all fancy. It's like a spaceship. Space drugs. But the point is, nobody else is vaping, it's just me vaping, and I kind of wanted to be responsible about it. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is drugs and, well, responsibility. Now, part and parcel to this, I'm also going to be talking about some of my experiences I had when I was younger, and I have been hesitant to talk about some of these things because, well, there's, some of my family watches these videos, and there are certain things that I have done in my life that I'm really not proud of at all. Some struggles that I went through that probably, upon them hearing it, might seem pretty scary to them. But in order to illustrate so people can understand that I do know what I'm talking about, maybe to help somebody else out who might be in similar experiences, I figure the best thing I can do is just be brutally blunt and honest. America's got a thing with drugs, and I feel very confident in saying that drugs are part of our culture. The reason I say that is we only make up about 5% of the world's population, yet we consume 75% of the world's prescription drugs. We just do. And on top of that, we also lead the world in illicit drug use. I mean, shit. That's pretty stunning. And despite the war on drugs costing about $50 billion a year, well, Americans still spend about $100 billion on drugs. And to top that off, we also spend about $374 billion on prescription drugs. So let's get on with it. I'll explain to you my experiences with drugs. My first experience with drugs was like most young Americans. It was with weed. Now, the first time I tried marijuana, I was very young. I was a young teenager. I think I was about 14, and I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't really like it, but I kept trying to like it, even though it never really seemed to be the thing for me. Later on in life, as things developed, I actually got kind of an allergy to it. If I smoke weed these days, I break out in hives, and I'm not really sure why that is, but to my knowledge, that's pretty much the only allergy I have. But what I did like to do a lot when I was a teenager was, well, drink. And drink a lot. Smoking cigarettes, drinking, acting like a big kid, like a grown-up, like a man. So I stayed otherwise pretty much drug-free up until I was 17. In 17, something interesting happened. I took LSD for the very first time. I was at this historical reenactment camp out, and this very, very pretty girl, who I learned later was a stripper, decided that she was going to dose me and my girlfriend, give us a little bit of acid. I spent the rest of that night seated at a campfire next to a drag queen who was dressed up as some medieval empress, princess, I'm not really sure what, and I believe he identified as a he, but he was pointing out all the pretty dancing fairy ladies in the fire to me all night, and it was pretty funny, pretty fun. But by and large, it was a very innocent experience, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I immediately had an impulse to want to do it again, but I did not for a very, very long time. Between that singular instance and when I got back into illegal drugs, there was a period of time where my home life where I was living, my girlfriend, she cheated on me a lot, and for far too long, and I didn't know any better. She's my first girlfriend. I lost my virginity to her. I stayed with her for far longer than I should have. But I didn't like to be home because I didn't like her. She sucked. She was a bitch. She cheated on me all the goddamn time. So I would run away to go and stay at my friend's house for sometimes a week, and just not go home. And what we would do is we would play Dungeons and Dragons and Cyberpunk, Werewolf and Vampire the Masquerade, and all those kind of tabletop role-playing, super nerdy type of stuff, But the thing about it, though, was we also were popping ephedra pills. Ephedra was legal for a while, and you could buy them in damn near any convenience store. Now, ephedrine is very, very close to amphetamine, and it is an upper. It cranks you up, man. You don't need to sleep, and it's also an appetite suppressant, so I didn't eat very much either. But we would go for long haul binges, days at a time without sleeping, just popping these pills over and over and over again. And they were all legal, and as far as we understood it, at least reasonably safe, right? Now, on top of getting a little bit malnourished because I wasn't really eating that much from the copious amounts of ephedrine abuse, there was also certain other side effects that were starting to bother me quite a bit. They made me a bit paranoid, a bit high-strung, but that was how I was choosing to run away from things, was just play around in a fantasy world and be cranked to the gills all the time, super hyper, chemically induced. Mania, man. And it was a lot of fun, I'm not gonna lie. It was a lot of damn fun. But psychologically, was it very good for me? Probably not. Yeah, ultimately probably not. There was other effects too. I mean, it wrecked my teeth. Something fierce. And I've actually over the past 2 years been slowly going to the dentist and finally getting my smile back, and I got a long way to go still. But, these are marks left on me by the choices that I made in my life and those things that I chose to experience. And that's just a part of being responsible about it, is understanding and accepting the things that you've done. So fast forward a little bit further, me and that girl ended up breaking up, and I went off and I made a bunch of friends, and I got myself inadvertently kind of tied up in illegal drugs again. Now, I myself wasn't necessarily doing them, but I was friends with a lot of people that were either selling them or in some cases making them. I gotta tell you, there's a really strange experience that happens when you otherwise think that you've been this good law-abiding citizen for most of your life, and you're hanging out in a house. There are these weird-looking guys, and they've got casserole dishes, and they're heating up raw opium. It's just such a strange experience to be a part of that, or to personally know where most of the largest indoor grow operations for marijuana are when it's still illegal. These hidden rooms in people's houses, and you go in there and it looks like an industrial greenhouse with automated rotating lights and shit, and it's so strange. looking back on it now and realizing the kind of person I was before I got into it, and then being in that situation, it's weird. And part of that was also getting into party culture and going to festivals and checking this thing out and that thing out, this concert, whatever. Get introduced to all the heavy hitting party drugs, which, to be honest, I never really got too terribly into any of them. I tried all of them, but I never really liked them. There was always one specific thing that I really did like. It is one very specific thing. I liked hallucinogens. Oh, man. It didn't matter what it was. Oh, you got some acid? Pfft. You got some shrooms? Man, let's do it. Let's go crazy. Let's have a really good time. One of those instances where you're like, I got off work at 3 p.m., meet up with my buddy. I got 12 hours before I gotta be up in time for work. Let's drive out into the woods and trip our balls off all fucking night so I can crash for about a half an hour and then back to the grind. That was my life. That's what I did. I did that a lot. A whole lot. And to be honest, it was an incredible experience. Almost all of them. There were some horror stories for sure, and I can tell you some maybe in the future, but by and large, a lot of these experiences were really positive for me. But I didn't quite realize at the time how close I was coming to disaster. Not necessarily I myself by my actions, but also how much disaster was happening around me at the time. You see, I got really fucking lucky. Aside from nicotine, I don't really have that addictive of a personality. I never got hooked on anything. Yeah, I mean, I drink all the fucking time, but I've never gotten DDTs, never felt a physical dependency of it. The only thing I ever felt a physical dependency on was, well, this shit. Nicotine, smoking, cigarettes. Now to just finish off my little bit of this story before we move on to the heavy stuff, it's been years since I did any illegal drugs. I like to joke about it quite a bit on like Twitter and whatnot. Like, hey, you know, you bring that blow, man, we're gonna have a party, blah, blah, blah. But my life is boring now, super boring. I just like to drink, I like to kick back, I like to have fun. But also being away from that culture for so long gives me an availability to examine it in hindsight. While I was running around and having all this fun, doing drugs and being a bad boy and all that kind of shit, I had a lot of friends die on me. A lot of friends. Tons of them. I also have had friends get completely strung out, addicted to all of the worst things that you should not be addicted to whatsoever in your life, and never come back from it. People who are lost now because of the choices that they made, because either by proxy of biology that they were more easily addicted, or by proxy of psychology that they were more receptive to getting addicted to it and didn't have the ability to withstand. Regardless the reason, it is something that was very salient, very real, that I experienced quite a bit. And I tended to brush it off as not very important, but it was important because it's indicative of something that really does happen in society that we don't pay that much attention to. And I'd like to make a video about addiction in specific, probably the biology and the psychology surrounding it. But for the purposes of time, we're gonna wait. We're gonna tackle that in the future. Instead, I think I wanna basically impress upon some very important aspects about drugs. And these are things that I think a lot of people don't really quite understand, unfortunately. Because studies have shown that teens and college kids tend to think things like prescription drugs are safer than street alternatives. Well, hey, I may not be taking all that ecstasy and that cocaine, but I like to pop an oxy and chase it with a beer. You know, it's a prescription med. It's safe, right? No, it's not fucking safe. Not at fucking all. For instance, Vicodin and Oxycontin, the two most popular drugs for people to take on the street as far as prescription drugs, these two drugs alone have caused more overdoses than cocaine and heroin combined. And then there's benzodiazepines, which are addictive as fuck. And if you try and break off from a chemical dependency that you built up towards them, sudden withdrawals from just going cold turkey, I mean, that shit can lead to seizures, strokes, heart attacks, hallucinations, And I mean, I don't have to tell you that if you have a serious enough stroke or heart attack, you fucking die. But also, I was raised up with this whole idea that marijuana is a gateway drug. You take that marijuana, next thing you know, you're going to be addicted to heroin. Well, actually, nothing could be further from the fucking truth. The truth of the matter is that prescription painkillers like OxyContin are expensive. Really fucking expensive. If you get a dependency on that shit, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. However, there is actually a way that you can get pretty similar effects for a lot cheaper. It's called heroin. So weed is not the gateway drug to heroin. Prescription painkillers are. I don't believe in the idea of a drug epidemic. I really don't, even with the staggering amounts of numbers. Instead, I would rather paint it as something that has developed culturally, whether that is from some conspiracy of big businesses and collusion with the government, or whether it's because of short-sightedness or arrogance, or I don't know, just wishing the problem away. Maybe that was part of it. But there is an issue, and there's a huge stigma surrounding it, and we tend to, as a society, treat drug users very, very poorly without really understanding how these types of things really develop, where this type of mindset comes from. We like to look at a drug abuser and be like, well, look at that junkie. Look at that piece of shit, that fucking junkie. But at the same time, there are people who you would not expect to be junkies, who are popping even more dangerous drugs and are at risk of offing themselves from the mortal coil. Now, you could be kind of a nihilist, you could be a hardcore Darwinist, where you believe, like, fuck them, if they're gonna off themselves, then fine, that's their own choice, gene pool, blah, 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 blah. I find that incredibly arrogant, and I feel that that's kind of a shitty attitude. You can have it if you want, that's okay, but for me, I could never do so. It's too dehumanizing, and it's, in my opinion, cowardly, because my own perspective on drugs was kind of cowardly as well. I engaged in and was part of drug culture for a long time, but it was cowardly how I brushed aside the responsibility of it in some ways too, even though I was more responsible than most. So the plugging your ears and la 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 la, there's no problem, that's no solution. It's not a good thing, nor is it a good thing to blissfully go into it unaware and start experimenting. All of this requires a heightened sense of personal responsibility, and that unfortunately is something that we don't really teach our kids in America these days very much. So what's the answer? Well, I'd say the answer is just blunt, forthright communication and being honest with yourself and being honest with your kids, because I don't blame my parents, because my parents had me when they were very old compared to most people. They had me when they were in their late 30s. So they had been so disconnected from popular culture as it developed. So when I was thrust into it and I was experiencing this new type of America, they were ill-equipped to be able to educate me. But if they had been keeping up on this type of thing, and if they would have educated me, I feel like I would have been at least better prepared. I would have been smarter about it, maybe. I don't know. I was kind of a shit when I was a teenager. I might have fucked up even more just to spite them. I don't really know what the answer is. But I think that we need to, as a society, stop holding back. I think that we should speak openly about it and try and have some compassion, at least a little bit more compassion when it comes to these types of experiences. Because if we just simply stigmatize people who use street drugs, but we're not paying attention to the fact that these prescription pills are fucking dangerous as shit, well, I think we're leaving ourselves open for greater tragedy. I don't think this is wise. I really don't. If you're a young person and you're thinking about trying out drugs, the only thing I can really offer you, because I can't tell you, don't do drugs, because if you want to, you're going to. And I can't say, well, you should do drugs, because honestly, drugs are really not for everybody. Life itself is so beautiful on its own and magnificent. If you open your eyes and you pay attention to it, you don't really need drugs. But if you're seeking that new experience, the only thing that I can really tell you is to keep your eyes open and to be aware. And if you are going to put something into your body, before you do, learn about that thing. Really understand that thing. because it's your responsibility. If you put it in your fucking body, it's your responsibility what happens to you. And the best thing you can do going into any situation, whether it's drugs or school or a job interview, is to know everything you can about the situation that you're going into and make a smart decision. And don't let people peer pressure you. Do a thing because you want to do a thing, not because you feel you have to do a thing. If too many people are pushing you into doing something, well, my reaction has always been, and this has probably kept me very safe in life, fuck off. I'll do what I want. Of course, I've also gotten in trouble by doing that too. Anyway, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Just a simple little video sharing a little bit of my life, sharing a little bit of my thoughts when it comes to, well, kind of a controversial topic, but it really shouldn't be, because it's here, and it's a part of our society, and we should have the bravery to be able to discuss it openly with each other, and maybe learn a way to understand just a little bit more. I hope you're well. I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.